Hi.
From the outside, my life with Evelyn appeared idyllic. We had built what many would call the perfect life. A beautiful home in the heart of Seattle, thriving careers, and a connection that seemed almost storybook. Our friends often commented on the way we complimented each other, finishing each other's thoughts or sharing private smiles in a room full of people. For 10 years, Evelyn and I had been the embodiment of everything people aspired to in a relationship. But under the glossy surface, I had started to notice cracks. At first, they were faint, so faint I questioned if I was imagining them. A dismissive gesture here, a hurried phone call there. Evelyn had always been an open book, her life laid bare for me to see. Lately, however, it felt as though she had begun to write in a script I couldn't decipher. The first jarring clue came on our anniversary. Evelyn, meticulous to a fault when it came to special occasions, had put together what should have been a perfect evening. Dinner reservations at our favorite waterfront restaurant, a thoughtful leather-bound journal as a gift. Everything appeared flawless. Yet her attention seemed elsewhere. Her laughter was forced, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. That night, I stared at the ceiling long after she had fallen asleep, the questions starting to form like clouds on the horizon. The second clue was more tangible. One weekend, while helping her unload groceries from her car, I spotted a navy blazer draped over the back seat, a sleek and expensive design that I didn't recognize. When I asked, she casually mentioned it belonged to a coworker who had forgotten it after a meeting. Her explanation sounded plausible, yet it didn't settle the gnawing unease in my chest. I told myself not to dwell on it. Relationships, after all, have their ebbs and flows. People grow busy, distracted. But those reassurances began to crumble when I found the key. It was small and unassuming, just a plain silver key with no distinguishing marks. I discovered it in the pocket of a coat Evelyn rarely wore, tucked away as though it had been deliberately hidden. The weight of it in my palm felt heavier than its modest size, my thoughts spinning through possibilities. For days, the key consumed my thoughts. I tried every lock in our house but found no match. It didn't belong to her office or her car. The more I searched, the more its mystery grew. Evelyn's explanations for her late nights and sudden work meetings had always seemed thin, but now they carried the sharp edge of deception. It was during one of those restless nights, lying awake, the key cold in my hand, that I decided I couldn't live in the shadows of doubt anymore. If Evelyn wouldn't give me answers, I would find them myself. The first time I followed her, my pulse thundered so loudly I feared she would hear it even from a distance. She had told me she was meeting a friend for dinner, but her car didn't head toward the restaurant she mentioned. Instead, she drove across the city to a residential district I didn't recognize and parked in front of an upscale apartment building. From my car, I watched as she walked confidently to the entrance and disappeared inside. The key she kept hidden in her coat pocket, likely granting her access. I waited for hours, watching each face that came and went, trying to piece together the life she seemed to be leading without me. When she finally emerged, her face unreadable and her clothes slightly rumpled, she returned to her car and drove home. That night I couldn't sleep. My mind churned with questions. Who lived in that apartment? What was Evelyn doing there? And why had she felt the need to keep it from me? The next day, I returned to the building. The plain red brick exterior gave away nothing, its entryway quiet and unassuming. Clutching the key, I approached the front door and slipped it into the lock. It turned effortlessly, and my heart pounded as the door clicked open. Inside, the hallways were sterile and nondescript. I scanned the names on the mailboxes, hoping for a clue, but none stood out. My feet carried me to the third floor, where I lingered outside apartment 312, the door I had seen Evelyn enter the night before. My hand hovered over the doorknob, indecision gripping me. I turned away before my courage gave out, retreating down the hall and out of the building. Over the next few weeks, Evelyn's behavior became more elusive. Her once open demeanor had been replaced by careful guardedness. Her phone, once left casually on counters, was now locked and tucked away. Her late nights multiplied, her explanations growing thinner with each new excuse. I tried to keep my doubts at bay, to convince myself that I was overthinking, but the image of that apartment door and the sound of her laughter, more strained than ever, stayed with me. One night, parked outside the building, I saw him. A tall man in his mid-30s with sharp features and an easy confidence exited the building and got into a sleek black car. Something about him tugged at my memory, but I couldn't place it. Had I seen him at one of Evelyn's work events? Party? His familiarity only deepened my suspicions. As I watched him drive away, I knew one thing for certain. This wasn't just in my head. Something real and tangible was unfolding, and I was determined to uncover the truth, even if it shattered the world I thought I knew. The image of the man from the apartment building haunted my thoughts. His confident stride, the way he had emerged from the building with an air of familiarity. It all felt significant in ways I couldn't yet explain. He was the missing piece of a puzzle I had only begun to assemble, and my mind refused to rest until I uncovered how he fit into Evelyn's life. I began combing through Evelyn's social circles, trying to find any trace of someone who matched his description. Old work events, mutual acquaintances, even casual conversations became potential leads. But every avenue turned into a dead end, and with each failure, my frustration grew. It felt as though I was grasping at shadows, the truth always just out of reach. I resolved to return to the apartment building, this time determined to push further. Armed with the silver key and a deepening sense of unease, I entered once again. The hallway was as quiet as before, the only sounds the distant murmur of voices behind closed doors. Standing outside apartment 312, the door Evelyn had entered, I pressed my ear to the wood. Faint voices reached me, indistinct but undeniably familiar in tone. My fingers tightened around the key in my pocket, the temptation to unlock the door almost overwhelming. But fear rooted me in place. Fear of what I might find, of what it might mean for the life I had built with Evelyn. Once again, I left the building with more questions than answers, the mystery growing heavier with every step. In the days following my second visit, the distance between Evelyn and me felt more pronounced than ever. She carried on as though everything was fine, her routines seamless and her demeanor calm. But I couldn't ignore the way her phone never left her side or the practiced nonchalance in her excuses for late nights. The silver key in my possession became a symbol of everything left unsaid between us, a constant reminder that the life we shared was no longer as it seemed. I buried myself in tasks to distract from the growing ache of suspicion. Sorting through old photographs one evening, I told myself it was just an innocent way to pass the time, a chance to revisit better days. But as I sifted through the shoebox of memories, one picture stopped me cold. It was from a holiday party at Evelyn's company 2 years prior. Evelyn was at the center of the frame, her smile radiant and her laughter captured mid-motion. But in the background, partially obscured by the crowd, stood the man from the apartment building. He leaned casually against a wall, drink in hand, his gaze unmistakably fixed on Evelyn. A chill ran down my spine. This wasn't a chance encounter. Their connection predated everything I had uncovered so far, and the realization made my stomach churn. Evelyn hadn't just met him recently. He had been a part of her life long before I suspected anything was amiss. Fueled by the revelation, I turned to the internet in search of answers. Hours of scouring old event invitations, professional networks, and social media profiles finally led me to his name: Adam Pierce. He was a marketing consultant, hired by Evelyn's company during a major project 2 years ago. Adam's online persona was carefully curated. Photos of luxurious vacations, awards for his work, and polished statements about his professional success painted a picture of someone who thrived on image and control. But there were no signs of a personal life, no family, no close connections. Just a veneer of perfection that made him feel even more elusive. I wondered how their relationship had begun. Was it strictly professional at first, or had it always been an affair veiled by work? The questions gnawed at me, each one a dagger to the heart of my trust in Evelyn. That evening, I decided it was time to confront Evelyn. I needed answers, and I resolved not to let her deflect me with her usual charm and quick wit. When she returned home from another late night, I asked her about Adam directly. Her reaction was immediate and telling. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by a feigned confusion. She claimed he was just a former colleague, someone she hadn't spoken to in years. Her tone was casual, too casual, and her words felt rehearsed. I pressed further, mentioning the holiday party photo. Her response shifted to defensiveness, accusing me of being paranoid and letting jealousy cloud my judgment. She painted herself as the victim of my insecurities, her protests growing louder as the cracks in her story widened. That night, as Evelyn slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, the weight of her deception pressing down on me. Her increasingly implausible excuses, the photograph of Adam, the key in my pocket, they were pieces of a story I could no longer ignore. The next morning, I resolved to take matters into my own hands. Evelyn's deflections could no longer pacify me. Adam Pierce, the apartment building, the key. All of it pointed to a truth I needed to uncover. Whatever lay behind the door of apartment 312, I was ready to face it. I couldn't shake the image of Adam watching Evelyn in that photograph. It wasn't just a moment caught on camera. It was a window into a connection that had existed far longer than I had realized. And now, armed with determination and the key that had haunted me for weeks, I knew it was time to take decisive action. The morning after my second visit to the apartment building, I knew I couldn't continue living in limbo. The key, the apartment, and Adam Pierce's shadowy presence had shaken the foundations of everything I thought I knew about Evelyn and about us. I called in a leave of absence from work, determined to focus on unraveling the truth. My first destination was the apartment building. This time, I wasn't content to simply observe. I approached the landlord under the guise of a prospective tenant. With a fabricated story about moving for work, I inquired about available units. The landlord, a genial man in his 60s, was more than happy to oblige. As we walked through the building, I subtly steered the conversation toward the residents. Most were long-term tenants, he explained, but apartment 312 was an exception. It was rented by a private individual on a short-term lease, someone who traveled frequently and kept to himself. My stomach twisted as the pieces began to align. Adam's frequent absences, his carefully curated public image, and the secrecy surrounding his life painted a picture of someone skilled at compartmentalizing. But where did Evelyn fit into his world? Was she just another entanglement, a fleeting chapter in Adam's double life? Or was her role more significant than I had imagined? As the weight of my investigation grew heavier, I realized I couldn't do this alone. I turned to my closest friend, Ryan, someone who had known Evelyn and me since college. When I confided everything I had uncovered, his reaction was a mix of disbelief and outrage. His loyalty to me was unquestionable, and he immediately offered his help. Ryan's background in tech proved invaluable. While I had relied on intuition and surface-level searches, he approached the situation methodically. Over the next few weeks, he scoured public records, social media accounts, and professional databases, piecing together a dossier on Adam Pierce. The results were damning. Adam's history was littered with red flags, rumors of inappropriate relationships with colleagues, a reputation for manipulating those around him, and a pattern of abruptly leaving projects under mysterious circumstances. His polished exterior concealed a trail of chaos and broken lives. But just as I thought we were nearing the bottom of this rabbit hole, Ryan uncovered something that made my stomach drop. Among Adam's connections was a woman named Clara, whose name appeared frequently in emails and messages. Clara wasn't just a casual acquaintance. She was listed as a co-tenant on the lease for apartment 312. The revelation hit me like a freight train. Evelyn wasn't just entangled with Adam. She was part of something far more complicated. Who was Clara, and what role did she play in this labyrinth of secrets? The questions multiplied, each one darker and more unsettling than the last. Ryan's discovery unraveled what little composure I had left. This wasn't just a case of infidelity. Evelyn's betrayal wasn't confined to the heart. It had spiraled into something far more insidious. I was no longer dealing with a simple affair. This was a web of lies involving multiple players, each layer more twisted than the last. Ryan, ever pragmatic, suggested we take a more direct approach. Together, we planned to monitor the apartment building, hoping to catch a glimpse of the dynamics between Adam, Clara, and Evelyn. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, we parked inconspicuously across the street, cameras ready and a notebook in hand to document any activity. The hours crawled by, the monotony broken only by the occasional tenant entering or leaving the building. Late in the afternoon, our patience was rewarded. A black sedan pulled up to the curb, sleek and unmistakable. Adam's car. He stepped out, impeccably dressed, and disappeared inside. Not 15 minutes later, another figure arrived. A woman with sharp features and an air of confidence stepped out of a rideshare. She moved purposefully, her demeanor leaving no doubt that she was no mere bystander in this unfolding drama. Clara. Ryan and I exchanged tense glances as we watched her enter the building. For hours, we waited as the two remained inside apartment 312. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the city's lights began to twinkle, casting long shadows across the street. As the evening wore on, our debate grew heated. Should we confront them? Call Evelyn? Every option seemed fraught with risk, each choice threatening to blow the situation wide open before we could fully understand it. My heart raced at the thought of acting impulsively, but my mind urged caution. We decided to wait, documenting everything we observed and planning our next steps carefully. The pieces of this puzzle were falling into place, but I knew there was more to uncover. More layers to this deception that Evelyn had woven into our lives. As Ryan drove us home that night, my thoughts churned with possibilities. The presence of Clara added a new dimension to the mystery. Who was she to Evelyn? Was she an accomplice, a rival, or something else entirely? Every answer seemed to lead to more questions, each one more disconcerting than the last. The life I thought I had built with Evelyn felt like a house of cards, one gust away from total collapse. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And as much as I feared what I might find, I knew I couldn't stop now. The darkness was closing in, but the path forward was clear. I would follow the threads, no matter where they led. When Adam and Clara finally exited the apartment, their demeanor was startlingly casual. They laughed, exchanged a few words, and then parted ways, each heading to their respective cars. Watching them drive off, I was struck by the strange normalcy of it all. The moment felt mundane, yet it carried the weight of the secrets I was uncovering. The mounting evidence only deepened my unease, and yet the answers remained frustratingly elusive. I needed clarity, but with every step closer to the truth, the picture became more complicated. Back home, Evelyn's behavior became increasingly erratic. Once predictable in her routines, she now came and went with little explanation. Her excuses for late nights felt flimsy, her once carefree laughter forced. Her phone, always in reach, had become a shield, a device she guarded more closely than ever. One evening, as Evelyn stood in the kitchen, her phone buzzed with a notification. I caught the name on the screen before she could swipe it away. Clara. My stomach dropped. The connection between Evelyn and Clara wasn't just circumstantial, it was direct. The discovery changed everything. This wasn't just an affair. Whatever Evelyn was involved in, it went far beyond infidelity. The web of lies and deception now connected her not only to Adam but to Clara as well. I shared the revelation with Ryan, who immediately suggested digging deeper. With his tech expertise, he began combing through online records and correspondence, piecing together Clara's background. She wasn't merely a bystander. As a financial consultant with a reputation for working discreetly with high-profile clients, her connections to Adam were both personal and professional. What we uncovered next left me reeling. Among the documents Ryan found was the registration of a shell company, with both Adam and Clara listed as co-founders. At first, the company seemed innocuous, its purpose vague. But the transactions associated with it told a different story. And then, among the listed clients, a single name stood out: Evelyn's. The revelation hit like a thunderclap. Evelyn wasn't just tangentially connected to Adam and Clara. She was deeply entrenched. Her name tied her directly to their operations, leaving no room for doubt that she played a significant role in whatever scheme they were running. That night, I confronted Evelyn. I laid out the evidence Ryan and I had gathered, sparing no detail. Her reaction was immediate, her expression a mix of shock and fear as she tried to compose herself. She denied any wrongdoing, insisting that her involvement with Adam and Clara was strictly professional. But her deflections only fueled my suspicions. As the confrontation escalated, her mask began to slip. The confident, composed woman I had known for years gave way to someone defensive and evasive. Her denials turned to anger, her excuses unraveling until she could no longer maintain the facade. Evelyn's silence in the face of mounting evidence felt like a betrayal in itself. The woman I had built a life with, trusted implicitly, now seemed like a stranger. The cracks in our marriage, once hidden beneath the surface, had become a gaping chasm. With Evelyn unwilling to provide answers, Ryan and I shifted our focus back to Adam and Clara. The shell company was a central piece of their scheme, a conduit for laundering money through seemingly legitimate channels. Adam's charm and connections made him the face of their operations, while Clara's financial acumen handled the logistics. Evelyn's involvement, however, remained unclear. Was she an accomplice, knowingly aiding their activities? Or had she been manipulated, a pawn in a larger game? Each new discovery blurred the line between victim and perpetrator, making it harder to untangle the truth. Desperate for clarity, I decided to confront Adam directly. It was a risky move, one that could blow up in my face if mishandled. I learned from Ryan's research that Adam frequented an upscale bar downtown, a place where he likely conducted both legitimate business and shadowy dealings. I approached him under the guise of a potential client interested in his consulting services. To my surprise, the ruse worked. Adam, ever the charmer, welcomed the opportunity to expand his network. Over drinks, I steered the conversation toward his professional life, probing for details about his operations. The more he spoke, the clearer it became that Adam thrived on control. His carefully crafted persona was a tool he used to manipulate those around him, extracting value while maintaining an air of legitimacy. I played along, feigning interest while cataloging every piece of information he let slip. But then, Adam's demeanor shifted. He leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharpening as if he sensed something off. "You're asking a lot of questions," he said, his tone measured but edged with suspicion. I deflected, laughing it off as curiosity about a potential business partner. He seemed to accept the explanation, but the tension lingered. As our conversation wound down, I realized I had pushed as far as I could without tipping my hand. Leaving the bar that night, I felt a strange mix of triumph and unease. I had gotten closer to Adam's world, but the risks were growing. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous the game became. Ryan and I reviewed everything we had learned, piecing together a picture of a sprawling operation that spanned both personal and professional realms. Evelyn's role, though still murky, was undeniably central. She wasn't just tangled in Adam and Clara's web. She was a thread that held part of it together. I knew the time for observation was nearing its end. The puzzle pieces were aligning, and the final picture was coming into focus. But the deeper I delved, the more I realized this wasn't just about Evelyn's betrayal. It was about exposing the full scope of the deception, no matter the cost. Adam was every bit as charismatic as I had imagined, his polished demeanor exuding confidence that bordered on arrogance. As we sat across from each other at the sleek downtown bar, I probed carefully, steering the conversation toward his business ventures. He spoke in broad strokes, his words chosen with meticulous care, revealing little beyond surface-level details. Beneath the veneer, however, I caught glimpses of unease. Adam wasn't entirely sure of my motives, but he could sense I wasn't a casual client. His relaxed posture stiffened when I mentioned Evelyn's name. Though his reaction was subtle, a flicker of recognition in his eyes, it was telling. He quickly masked it with a neutral expression, brushing off my inquiries with claims that their relationship had been strictly professional. But his body language betrayed him. The encounter left me unsettled. Adam's deflections only deepened my suspicions, making it clear that Evelyn's connection to him and Clara wasn't a mere coincidence. As I drove home, the weight of the unfolding conspiracy pressed down on me. The tangled web Evelyn had woven threatened to consume everything I held dear, and I was no longer sure if I could untangle myself without irreversible damage. At home, Evelyn's behavior continued to shift. Her distance was palpable, her once effortless charm replaced by an almost suffocating tension. She carried herself like someone under siege, her nerves evident in every forced smile and darting glance. It wasn't just guilt I saw in her. It was fear. One evening, As we sat across from each other at the dinner table, her phone buzzed incessantly. She ignored it at first, but the persistence of the notifications betrayed their importance. I caught a glimpse of the name on the screen before she flipped the phone over. Clara. The sight confirmed what I had suspected all along. This wasn't just an affair or a fleeting lapse in judgment. Evelyn was deeply entangled in something calculated and deliberate, a conspiracy that extended far beyond our marriage. Ryan and I doubled down on our investigation, focusing on the financial aspects of Adam and Clara's operation. The shell company, already suspicious, now revealed a clearer picture of its purpose. Large sums of money flowed between accounts, their origins obscured by a maze of intermediaries. Some payments were tied to legitimate contracts, but others were clearly fabricated, classic hallmarks of money laundering. Then came the bombshell. Evelyn's name appeared in several of the transactions. She wasn't just a client. She was listed as a partner in multiple agreements, her signature authorizing payments and her email address used for correspondence with other parties. The evidence was damning. I stared at the documents in disbelief, my breath catching in my throat. Evelyn wasn't merely complicit. She was an active participant in a criminal enterprise. The woman I had built my life with, trusted implicitly, had been living a double life. Fueled by the overwhelming evidence, I confronted Evelyn that night. I laid the documents in front of her, detailing her involvement with Adam and Clara. Her reaction was immediate, her face draining of color as she tried to compose herself. She denied everything at first, her voice trembling with desperation. But as I pressed her, the walls she had carefully constructed began to crumble. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed to knowing about the shell company and its operations. According to her, she had been coerced into participating. Adam and Clara had exploited her vulnerabilities, using threats against her career and reputation to draw her into their scheme. Her story was plausible, even compelling. She described feeling trapped, unable to extricate herself without risking everything she had worked for. She claimed her initial involvement had been reluctant, but over time, the lines had blurred, and she had been pulled deeper into their world. As Evelyn's confession unfolded, she revealed layers of the conspiracy that I hadn't anticipated. The shell company wasn't just a front for laundering money. It was part of a sprawling network that included bribery, blackmail, and ties to powerful individuals across multiple industries. She described overhearing conversations about using violence to silence whistleblowers, leveraging compromising information to manipulate business rivals, and laundering money for criminal organizations. The operation was larger and more dangerous than I had imagined, its reach extending far beyond Adam and Clara's immediate circle. Evelyn's fear became tangible as she spoke. Her hands trembled as she recounted instances where Adam and Clara had hinted at the consequences of betrayal. Her tears, her trembling voice, her desperate pleas for understanding painted a picture of someone who had been in over her head from the beginning. Despite her claims of coercion, the damage was done. Evelyn's betrayal wasn't just personal. It was systemic, involving a deliberate effort to conceal her actions from me and from the world. Whether she had been a willing participant or a reluctant one no longer mattered. The trust between us had been irreparably broken. As I listened to her confession, a cold resolve settled over me. I couldn't let her fear or my lingering affection cloud my judgment. The conspiracy she had become a part of wasn't just a threat to our marriage. It was a threat to anyone who stood in its way. The truth was now fully in the open, but it left me with a stark choice. Protect Evelyn and risk letting the conspiracy continue unchecked, or expose everything and risk the fallout. The path forward would demand sacrifices I wasn't sure I was ready to make. Despite my anger, I couldn't ignore the gravity of Evelyn's situation. She wasn't just my wife. She was now a key figure in unraveling a web of crime far more intricate than I had imagined. Her role as a potential whistleblower came with staggering implications and dangerous risks. Exposing Adam and Clara wouldn't just threaten their empire, it would upend lives and potentially put us in harm's way. Ryan and I devised a plan to gather irrefutable evidence, this time with the goal of involving law enforcement. Evelyn, reluctantly but resolutely, agreed to help. Her fear was palpable in every interaction, her hands trembling as she described the inner workings of the shell company and Adam's extensive network. She was terrified, not just for herself but for all of us. Our plan hinged on gaining access to Adam's apartment, which we suspected held critical evidence. Evelyn claimed to still have a spare key, a remnant from her time working closely with him. The thought of entering his private space filled me with dread, but the potential payoff outweighed the risks. On the night of the break-in, the tension was suffocating. Evelyn entered the building alone, her steps hesitant but determined. Ryan and I waited in the car, watching her disappear through the front doors. Minutes felt like hours until she emerged, pale and visibly shaken, clutching a laptop and a stack of documents. The drive home was silent, the weight of our actions pressing down on all of us. Evelyn clutched the evidence tightly, as though letting go would make the enormity of what we had done real. The contents of Adam's laptop were a damning trove of incriminating evidence. Financial records laid bare the scale of the shell company's operations, transactions that funneled illicit funds through a maze of legitimate accounts. Emails and messages revealed connections to high-profile individuals who had benefited from or enabled Adam and Clara's schemes. There were even video recordings of meetings where bribery, blackmail, and illegal activities were openly discussed. The sheer breadth of the operation was staggering. Adam and Clara weren't just running a criminal enterprise. They were linchpins in a network that spanned industries and borders. Evelyn's involvement, though less central, was undeniable. But as we sifted through the data, a new complication arose. Adam discovered the theft within hours. Evelyn's phone lit up with a barrage of calls and messages, his fury evident in every word. His threats escalated quickly, shifting from demands to veiled warnings. It was clear Adam wouldn't hesitate to protect his empire, and we had made ourselves targets. Despite the danger, we turned the evidence over to law enforcement. The ensuing investigation was swift, the authorities moving to freeze accounts, raid properties, and dismantle key aspects of the operation. Adam's apartment was searched within days, yielding additional evidence that further implicated him and Clara. But the fallout was far from over. Adam and Clara's connections ran deep, their network entangled with powerful figures who wouldn't go down without a fight. The investigation uncovered layers of corruption that extended far beyond the shell company, exposing a systemic rot that had allowed them to operate with impunity for years. The aftermath took a heavy toll. Evelyn's cooperation with law enforcement earned her some leniency, but it came at a steep price. Our marriage, already strained to its breaking point, couldn't survive the weight of her betrayal. We separated shortly after the investigation began, the trust between us irreparably broken. Evelyn moved into a modest apartment on the other side of town, and our interactions became perfunctory, limited to practical matters. Despite everything, part of me still cared for her, though I couldn't bring myself to forgive her completely. Ryan remained my rock, his unwavering support a lifeline as I tried to rebuild. Our friendship deepened in the wake of the ordeal, his determination to uncover the truth, a constant reminder that living a lie was no life at all. Adam and Clara's empire, once seemingly untouchable, crumbled under the weight of the investigation. Headlines detailed their arrests, the seizure of their assets, and the high-profile individuals caught in their web of corruption. Watching their downfall felt surreal, like witnessing the climax of a crime thriller play out in real life. Evelyn's testimony proved pivotal in the prosecution's case. On the stand, she detailed her involvement, acknowledging her mistakes and shedding light on Adam and Clara's methods. As I watched her speak, I saw a woman grappling with her past, striving to make amends. It didn't absolve her, but it was a step toward redemption. In the months that followed, I worked to piece my life back together. The journey wasn't easy. The scars of betrayal ran deep, but I found solace in small victories. A new job, a new home, and a renewed focus on personal growth became the building blocks of a life reshaped by hard truths. Evelyn began attending therapy, her journey towards self-awareness and accountability evident in our occasional conversations. She admitted to being blinded by fear and ambition, her choices driven by a desperate need to protect herself and the life we had built. Her words felt sincere, but they couldn't undo the damage. Despite the wreckage, I held on to one truth. Exposing Adam and Clara had been the right thing to do. Their downfall was a victory not just for me, but for everyone whose lives they had touched with their corruption. As I watched the dust settle, I found hope in the lessons learned. Betrayal, though painful, had taught me resilience. The collapse of my marriage had forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about trust, love, and the fragility of human connections. Adam and Clara's empire had fallen, but the echoes of their actions would linger for years. Evelyn and I were no longer the people we had been when this began, but in our own ways we were moving forward. And as I stood on the threshold of this new chapter, I knew one thing for certain. The truth, no matter how painful, had set me free. One quiet evening, as I settled into the rhythms of my new life, an unexpected knock at the door disrupted the calm. Standing on the other side was Clara. Gone was the polished, confident woman I had observed entering the apartment building so many times. In her place stood someone worn down by the weight of her choices, her once impeccable appearance replaced by an air of desperation. My first instinct was to close the door, to shut her out entirely. But something in her expression, absent of arrogance or manipulation, made me pause. For the first time, Clara looked human. She asked for a moment of my time, her voice subdued. Against my better judgment, I let her in. Clara's visit became a revelation I hadn't anticipated. She told me she wanted to clear the air, to provide information she believed I deserved to know. Her account was startling, forcing me to reconsider much of what I thought I understood. According to Clara, Evelyn's involvement in the scheme had been far more reluctant than I had believed. Adam had targeted her deliberately, exploiting her vulnerabilities and weaving her into his web of deceit. What Evelyn had described as coercion was, in Clara's words, an insidious manipulation, Adam's ability to control and dominate those around him. Clara's confession carried a bitterness that hinted at both regret and self-preservation. She admitted her own complicity in Adam's schemes, but her tone suggested she was as much a victim of his influence as Evelyn had been. The most chilling part of her story, however, was Adam's fixation on Evelyn. Clara described it as an obsession, one that had gone beyond professional manipulation. Adam had used their shared business dealings as a way to keep Evelyn tethered to him, eroding her autonomy over time. The realization turned my stomach. Evelyn hadn't just been my wife or Adam's associate. She had been caught in a psychological trap, her choices shaped and constrained by forces beyond her control. Clara's visit forced me to confront the complexity of Evelyn's actions. Her betrayal had been real, but so had her suffering. For all her flaws, Evelyn had been manipulated and used, her autonomy chipped away piece by piece. In the weeks that followed, I reflected on the nature of forgiveness, not just for Evelyn but for myself. Could I forgive her for her role in the scheme? Could I forgive myself for the anger and resentment I had carried? The answers weren't immediate or easy, but the process of seeking them brought me a surprising sense of clarity. While sorting through the remnants of my old life, I stumbled upon a box of unsent letters Evelyn had written during the investigation. Each page was filled with apologies, explanations, and heartfelt confessions. Reading them felt like peering into a side of Evelyn I had forgotten existed. A woman who, despite her mistakes, had loved deeply and fought to protect what she believed mattered. The letters didn't absolve her actions, but they offered a window into the internal conflict she had faced. They reminded me that even those who hurt us are often struggling in their own ways. Evelyn and I met one last time to discuss our future. The trial was over, the sentencing complete, and the shadow of Adam and Clara had finally lifted. Sitting across from her, I saw someone who had been broken but was working to rebuild herself. We agreed to part ways amicably. There was no dramatic reconciliation, no tearful goodbye, just a quiet acknowledgement of our shared past and a mutual decision to move forward separately. Before she left, Evelyn handed me a small envelope. Inside was the silver key that had started everything, its surface catching the light as it rested in my palm. She asked me to keep it as a reminder, not of the pain but of the lessons we had learned. I held the key, its weight no longer oppressive but symbolic of the journey we had endured. In the months that followed, I began to rebuild. The scars from the ordeal didn't fade easily, but they became part of a new foundation. I rediscovered pieces of myself I had neglected, old hobbies, meaningful friendships, and a sense of purpose outside the chaos that had consumed my life. Evelyn and I stayed in touch sporadically, our conversations polite but distant. She found a new job, one far removed from the shadows of her past, and seemed determined to carve out a better life for herself. I wished her well, genuinely hoping she would find the peace she deserved. Adam and Clara's downfall had been a turning point for more than just Evelyn and me. Their empire of deceit was dismantled, and their names became synonymous with corruption. The legal proceedings had exposed not only their crimes but also the systemic failures that had allowed them to operate unchecked. The truth, as painful and messy as it had been, had set us free. It had forced Evelyn and me to confront the cracks in our relationship and the roles we had played in each other's lives. Standing on the other side of the storm, I realized that freedom didn't come from perfection or closure. It came from the strength to let go of what no longer served us and to move forward with open eyes and a resilient heart. As I placed the silver key in a drawer, its weight a memory rather than a burden, I felt a quiet sense of peace. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again, and that, I realized, was enough.
How was the video? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos. Leave your thoughts in the comment below. Thank you for watching. Bye bye.